Welcome to the Hawaii Association for College Admission Counseling Virtual College Fair. Thank you for joining us. A few announcements before we get started. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type your questions to our presenters at any time. Your camera and microphone are off, so the panelists cannot see or hear you. And this is just one of many different sessions happening, so please do sign up for additional sessions. The presentation is being recorded and will be available in about a week at strivescan.com/Hawaii. And the title of this session is COVID Impacts on the College Process. And now I'd like to turn it over to our presenters, and I'll hand it over to Carissa.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're coming from. Thank you for joining us for the COVID impacts on the college process for the Hawaii Neighbor Island Virtual College Fair this March 2021. Today, we have a panel that will be discussing and clarifying changes and decisions that have been made across college campuses or on college campuses due to the impacts that the COVID-19 pandemic has had to the college admissions process. We hope that we recognize that this is a challenging time for everyone. In particular, it's very challenging when it comes to the college admissions process. So our goal today is to alleviate some possible stressors and anxieties that you may have, and hopefully clarify some things to you so that you can go and continue on with your college journey with a little bit less stress and move forward in exciting ways as you continue these next steps in your college admissions process. So I will have us introduce ourselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Gonzalez. I serve as Associate Director for Diversity Recruitment at Williams College, where I've served for the last 5 years. Prior to being at Williams, I worked for my alma mater, Boston University, and I have recruited in Hawaii for the last 3 years. Really excited to be here with you all this Saturday. Evening for me, morning for you. Always a kind of a funny thing with time zones, but I'm happy to share a little bit more about how COVID has impacted the college process throughout the rest of the afternoon with you. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Camille Kreitz, and I am the Associate Director of Admissions for Syracuse University, and I am a West Coast regional representative. So I represent Los Angeles or Southern California and Hawaii, but I'm based in Los Angeles. So I have been covering Hawaii for the last few years, and I was very disappointed this year not to be able to visit. But before working in admissions for Syracuse, I worked over in our study abroad office in Florence, Italy. And I did that for a long, long time as an academic advisor and also as program development. So when I moved back to California several years ago, I moved into this admissions position. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for joining us today. And hopefully we'll be able to make some sense out of this process.
And good morning. I'm coming to you from Hawaii, so it's about 10:30 or so in my time zone. My name is Carissa Guzman. I am an interim director and academic advisor for the School of Travel Industry Management, Office of Student Academic Services. So I'm actually an academic advisor. So I do still work in recruitment, primarily recruiting students specifically for the School of Travel Industry Management and the Travel Industry Management major on the UH Manoa campus. Prior to this, though, I was an admissions counselor for about 4 years for the University of Hawaii at Manoa. So I'm very familiar with the admissions process. And also, I also have a little bit of experience as well, too, when it comes to the college side and being a college student and what the next 4 years will look like for you. So before we transition to the next slide, I just wanted to mention about the questions. It was mentioned earlier, if you do have questions, please do put it in the chat box, and we'll most likely address all the questions at the end as well, too. So thank you again for being here, and I will hand it off to Camille.
Thank you, Carissa. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about what has changed during COVID as far as the college search process goes. So first of all, campus tours. For the most part, most universities were not offering in-person campus tours this year. And so virtual campus tours became all the rage. Some were better, some were worse, but definitely it was a way for universities still to show off their campuses and for students to get a feel for what a campus was like. I definitely recommend the campus tour, and particularly for you students from Hawaii that often probably don't even get to visit campuses so much, on the mainland or even perhaps international campuses. So definitely the virtual campus tour, I think, is here to stay. So I think this was one of the positive changes, but it's definitely a great way to be able to visit a campus if you can't do so in person. Information sessions often, for example, when I come to Hawaii and visit, I usually do a fair. I might do some school visits in the morning, and I usually will offer some sort of an information session in person. So for students and their families. Obviously, this has all changed during COVID. These in-person information sessions weren't happening, but a lot of schools were offering them virtually. And there are lots of different formulas. There are general information sessions for the entire university. There are college specific, so departmental specific. So for example, if you're interested in an engineering program at a university, you can go and do a virtual presentation specifically to their engineering program. Also, there were student panels. Now, one thing I would definitely recommend is if you are going to do, you can only choose one virtual presentation, I would definitely recommend those student panels because they're really a great way for you to be able to hear from students what they're doing on campus, what kind of internships, what their classes are. Can they really pick up a double major? What their study abroad experiences were like. So all of those things are really, really important. And so I would definitely look for schools that are offering those student panels, if at all. And then the topical virtual sessions about perhaps financial aid or housing or study abroad, et cetera. But really try to take advantage of these because a lot of schools have done a lot of really good work in creating these virtual events. And it's a great way to be able to do your college search from home. So take advantage of that. And again, I think these are things that are going to stay with us. We'll definitely continue the virtual programming in addition to our in-person. Virtual high school visits. These this year have been hit and miss, I think, for college representatives. Most of my colleagues agree that they have not been as good as our in-person school visits. But for you students that are freshmen, sophomore, juniors, I would really encourage you to take advantage of high school visits when your counselor gets them set up, because it's your chance to meet a college representative in person. And we get to know you, you get to know us. It shows demonstrated interest, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You learn about the university. It is a great, easy way to learn about a school. All you have to do is turn on your Zoom. And I know we're all Zoomed out. We all are. I understand that. But I really, really encourage high school students to take advantage of these high school visits. And then that leads me into the demonstrated interest side of things. So for schools that do track demonstrated interest, campus visits, interviews, attending sessions, all of those different things, a tour, all count as demonstrated interest. And so they will still count as demonstrated interest if you do them virtually. So again, even if you can't do those things in person, definitely take advantage of the virtual opportunities because they will still show up. And I did skip interviews. So for the schools that offer interviews, we, for example, do interviews typically in person. What I do usually with my Hawaii students is I try to schedule interviews in the afternoons when I'm there on the islands. And then the students that still want to be interviewed in the past, I would set up a FaceTime or a Skype interview. This year we switched to 100% virtual interviews. And I will definitely maintain that. I'll still, if I can, do in-person interviews. But for those of you who can't get to a campus or maybe can't get to a city where in-person interviews are happening, definitely the virtual interviews, I think, are the way to go. So again, a lot of the things that changed during COVID, I think will stay as an extra tool for universities, and you guys should all be taking advantage of that as well. Next slide. So how did the college application process change? So how did we read applications differently? You know, what was going on there? For those of us that do a holistic review, meaning we really look at your application from cover to cover, the biggest change for us was the fact that so many schools went test optional or test blind, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation. But because we were missing that extra component, many of us, what we did is we focused even more on course rigor. So what does that mean? That means that as I'm looking at your transcript, I'm looking at the classes that you're taking, how much you've challenged yourself as far as the level of classes. Have you challenged yourself with those AP classes or those honor or those IB or those advanced classes based on what your school offers? Nobody's going to count off for the fact that you didn't take an AP class if your school doesn't offer AP classes. So we're looking at what your school offers, and then we're looking in depth at how much you challenged yourself within those parameters. Also, did you go above and beyond? So does your school require 2 years of foreign language, but maybe you took 3 or 4? You know, did you meet your 3 years of science requirement, but you took a 4th year? Those are the sorts of things that we're looking at. And what we did, a lot of us, is we created a score system to actually tell us what your rigor score was. So that was sort of a big change in how colleges read applications. As far as grades and weighted versus unweighted versus recalculated, that pretty much remained the same. What changed is how we looked at the spring 2020 transcripts. Everybody that was in school had a weird spring 2020 transcript. It might have been pass fail. You know, a lot of students, their grades fell because they didn't transition well, or their schools didn't transition well to the lockdown and to virtual learning. So many of us are looking at that spring 2020 transcript with a grain of salt, because we all understand that that was a pivotal year. We do expect fall 2020 to look better, but spring 2020, don't be, you know, too worried if your grades dipped that year, because we understand. We were all in it together, and we understand that. As far as extracurricular activities pre and during COVID, so we know obviously that so many of your extracurriculars got canceled. Obviously, if you're a baseball player, your season got cut. But what we're looking to see is what you did with that adversity and how you kind of turned that around and what you did instead. So, you know, did your parents lose their jobs so you had to get a job to help support the family? Did you have to give up all of your extracurricular options because you had to stay at home and help your little brother and sister with their schoolwork because mom and dad were working? We're looking to see what you did in place of your typical activities, whatever that is. If you couldn't play baseball, maybe you went out and learned how to surf. I talked to so many students this year that taught themselves how to surf. It was a great activity to do outdoors and, you know, relatively safe. So those are the kind of things we're looking to see how you transitioned, you know, what you did during that pivot. Letters of recommendation remain the same. The only thing is that it might be a little bit more challenging for you to find teachers that you connected with because of the virtual learning. So that's something that you need to work on with your teachers, figure out, you know, which ones you have a relatively good relationship with, and you feel like you've connected with them even online. And then lastly, essays. And what I'll say here is essays have remained the same as far as the personal essay, supplemental essays for different colleges, and personal essays. But the Common Application added a COVID essay. Now, this is not an essay that students are required to write. It is, however, there as a tool if you did have some major life-changing experience during COVID, an illness in the family, you know, one computer, 4 brothers and sisters, everybody, you know, competing to take their classes. Whatever that sort of major, parents lost their jobs again or something like that. If there was a major disruption to your life besides the regular major disruption that we all had, then that's what you use the COVID essay for, but don't feel like you're required to write something for that. So those are sort of the main changes in the application process. And now I will hand it over to Stephanie to talk about test scores.
Thank you. So we felt like testing was such a big part of the process that we wanted to give it its own column and its own section to share a little bit about, since that's probably the biggest change that has affected colleges and universities and has affected students. So first, just a little bit of language and vocabulary. Test optional means that the institution is giving you as the student the option to submit testing. So if they are test optional, you can choose to submit standardized testing if you would like to, or you can choose not to submit standardized testing. Test blind, on the other hand, means that that institution is not going to look at your standardized testing in any way, shape, or form. So even if you somehow submitted it on an additional email or in your common application, they would redact that information and remove it. They would be test blind in their process. So they are different vocabulary words for this college search process and your college application process. And I did just want to clarify that because you are going to continue to hear many different versions of this as you go through your search, that some schools may have a test blind policy, other schools may have a test optional policy, other schools may opt to require standardized testing. We're all still sort of making those next steps and figuring out what their testing policies are going to look like. Many institutions at this point have made decisions for those of you that are juniors and even for those of you that are sophomores, but not all have. So I'll ask for your patience for those institutions that haven't yet made their decisions, and know that they are actively working to make those choices and those decisions. And lastly, I will say, the test optional piece can oftentimes be maybe the most challenging to figure out, because when testing was required, you knew what you had to do. You had to submit it. When testing is blind, you know what you have to do. There's no way it's going to be factored in. But when it's optional, it's really up to you to make that decision. So I would say make an informed decision. Reach out to your college counselor to have a conversation about what makes sense for you as an individual and for you within your list of schools that you're looking at. For some schools, it may be strategic for you to submit your standardized testing. And for other institutions on your list, it may not be strategic for you to submit your standardized testing. So reaching out and connecting with your college counselor, getting a sense of the admitted student score profile at each of the schools that are on your list, those can be helpful ways for you to sort of make that difficult decision. And another kind of follow-up question to that is, does the institution super score the SAT or the ACT or both? And getting a sense of what their super score policy is if they're looking at only your highest subsections on standardized testing, so that you can figure out whether or not you would like to submit testing and what that looks like for you. And lastly, I will say institutions went test optional and or test blind this past year in response to the pandemic, because we don't want students risking their health or safety to take standardized tests. I think all colleges and universities, for the most part, have shown this year that we can manage an admission process without testing. So if it puts you at a risk in any way, shape, or form, do not put yourself in that situation. Really think strategically about applying to test optional and test blind institutions, because I think that will be the best choice for your health and safety. So that's a little bit about standardized testing. I'm sure there will be lots of questions, so feel free to pop those into the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer those as we go through. Switching gears a little bit, I also wanted to talk about the financial aid process, which oftentimes goes hand in hand with the admission process. And there are some implications for how financial aid has shifted because of COVID. So I'll speak first about need blind and then merit. In terms of the need-based components, Camille already alluded to changes in family circumstances. If your parents lost a job, if you had to start working, if there was a change in your parents' hours, for example, at work, whatever might have happened during that 2020 year, and even may still be happening now, those are things that we're going to factor in as we're looking at your need-based financial aid applications. So the FAFSA is going to ask you, the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid that is required by nearly every single institution because it is free governmental funding. So the FAFSA is going to ask you for your 2020 tax information, and that is probably a year that is a little bit in flux for many students and families. Be proactive about sharing changes in your family's financial circumstances, either on the FAFSA or with the individual financial aid offices that you're applying to. So once you've gotten your list set, you've sent your financial aid forms in. If you feel like there's still more information that I should be sharing because the tax information that I gave you isn't going to show you the full picture, be proactive in sharing that information, because that can be really helpful as institutions are evaluating your family's financial need. Then on the merit-based side of things, a really sort of important question for you as you're looking at merit-based scholarships is standardized testing required for a merit-based scholarship opportunity? So while an institution may be test optional, they may require standardized testing for merit-based scholarships. So it's a good sort of follow-up question if you are looking at merit-based scholarship opportunities within an institution. Do a quick search on their website for that merit-based opportunity and get a sense of whether or not standardized testing might be required as a part of that process. So those are some quick pieces around financial aid. And then lastly, I just always think it's helpful to have a quick list of questions in your back pocket for those virtual information sessions, or those moments in which you want to email an admission officer to connect. Couple questions that you might want to consider. What is the campus visit policy? Is the institution allowing visitors on campus? Are they allowing out-of-state visitors on campus? What does that look like for the summer? What does that look like for next fall? Does the institution track demonstrated interest, which is what Camille was speaking about before? If the institution tracks demonstrated interest, then you want to be really strategic about making sure that you're getting onto virtual tours, virtual information sessions, or if applicable, on campus visits. Are virtual opportunities available above and beyond maybe what you're seeing on the initial page? So maybe there are campus tours and information sessions that are always held, but maybe there's also an open house, that specific panel that was mentioned prior, or a specific school or college program that will give you more information that may just be helpful for you in your college search process. Definitely looking for those pieces. Knowing what the testing policies are at all of the schools that you're applying to. And then finally, as a reminder, the testing policies and how they might differ for merit scholarships. So those are just some things that I would say keep in your back pocket as you're navigating your virtual searches or sort of next steps in your process. And then I'm going to turn it to Carissa to speak about what this looks like when you transition to college.
Thanks, Stephanie. So we wanted to talk a little bit to what it would look like when you actually get to the college campus. And this can even apply as well to the college admissions process as well too. So the first thing we really wanted to highlight is really the vital role of technology and even the library when it comes to college admissions, and then also your transition into the college campus. So thinking about computer access, or what does your technology setup look like? So Stephanie had talked about, financial aid. And when you get a financial aid package from a school, maybe that's something that you should consider or think about when you're budgeting, right? Do you want to purchase a new laptop? Maybe you should invest in a new laptop. Maybe a Wi-Fi hotspot is another thing that you might want to invest in as well too, because given the reliance on technology that COVID has really amplified, and as Camille has stated, is probably not going to go anywhere, and will probably only be utilized more in the years to come. It's really vital to have a good computer technology setup. So definitely think about that as you're transitioning into college, and can you budget for that? Also, how are universities going to be communicating with you? Email, social media, definitely check your email, utilize your emails. Check the university's social media sites as well too. Follow the social media platforms if you aren't already. Follow their social media pages, because oftentimes universities will post a lot of important information on their social media pages. So it might be open houses that you can attend, or receptions that you can attend that get posted on the social media sites as well. So definitely follow along all those. Just know when you get into college as well too, they often, universities will often use their own classroom platforms. So you may be familiar with something called Blackboard. There are other different technology systems that universities use. You might be using it yourself as well right now too, Google Classroom, those types of things that will continue to be utilized when you transition onto the college campus. So the nice thing, I guess, as you're going through online learning at the high school level, and for those of you who maybe are transfer students or thinking of transferring to university, you're already familiarized with it a little bit, right? And so just, think about what you've been doing, and that will probably continue to be used as you transition onto college campuses. Another thing that you need to be mindful of, and a lot of this impacts like time management as you're thinking of maybe putting together your class schedule, what do the classes look like, is what type of learning pedagogy will a course be taught when you get to campus. And so there is often, there is synchronized style learning, asynchronous style learning, or pedagogy, hybrid, and then also in person. So in person is kind of what we're used to, which is in person, you go to class like every week, you finish out the semester. But with the transition with the COVID impact, with the COVID-19 pandemic, that's changed things. So now oftentimes classes are taught either synchronized style or asynchronous style. Synchronized style usually means that it's similar to in person, but it's been transitioned to a classroom. An online Zoom classroom. And so that basically means you have a Zoom meeting whenever your class is scheduled that you have to attend. Other teachers or other professors actually teach their courses asynchronized. So what that means is all the information, you don't really actually have a scheduled time that you need to meet with a professor. So the professor actually posts all their information, whether it be through one of those classroom platforms, and you as a student have to utilize more independent learning to get through the class. Other professors might teach their classes more hybrid style, so they do a combination of maybe some online learning, some in person that might be utilized for maybe science labs, maybe some other courses as well too. So those are some things you're going to want to be thinking about as you're putting together your class schedule when you get to college in the fall semester or whenever you may get to school. Because, maybe as students right now, you're starting to learn, I actually kind of don't really like asynchronous style learning, or maybe you can already tell asynchronous style learning is not really going to work for me because I need, to be at least have a check-in like every week where I can meet with a professor so that I know I'm like keeping on track with my classroom assignments. So maybe then synchronized style learning, and that's the type of classes that you should look for when you're registering for classes in the fall semester, right? So just thinking about that as you're looking and you're thinking about how am I going to put together my class schedule, how classes are going to be taught, and how you might want to reach out to your academic advisors to kind of talk about these things as you're thinking about putting together a class schedule as you transition into the college university. So another thing we really want to highlight, and this has been highlighted, I think, throughout the duration, especially in Camille's presentation, is just really taking advantage of the online space. It really, on a positive side of things, it really has given the opportunity for students to have a lot more access to things that they might not have had access to before. So, for example, Camille talked about the college, virtual college campus tours that you can go on. There's a website called Campus Reels. Campus Reels has a lot of student-driven kind of campus tours as well too. Definitely go on to those spaces to familiarize yourself more with college campuses that maybe you wouldn't have had the opportunity to do so before. Additionally, at the college level, oftentimes majors, programs will offer a lot of more webinars, events, networking opportunities because professionals have a little bit more time to participate, right? Because the commute is cut down. So think about that for you as well too, right? The commute has been completely cut down if you're doing primarily online learning, right? So you have a little bit more time in terms of your schedule, and how are you going to manage your time? How are you going to manage your schedule? Maybe flex your schedule now that you can take advantage of a little bit more flexibility with the lack of commute that you might have when it is to going to campus to get to class as well. Also, it's still very, very important to get involved. And what might that look like? Student clubs are still doing things. It might be more in an online format, but it is really important to get involved. And universities will often have a lot of different events and promote lots of different things to try to get you involved on campus. And so even though I've had students tell me that it's a little bit harder to get involved when it's like an online format, it feels a little bit more awkward. How do you really build those relationships when it's an online format? I still encourage students, to try their best. Oftentimes the students feel comfortable. They might meet students through these online online classes, and then they might meet each other socially distanced, of course, out in person as well too. So just still get involved with whatever the university might have to offer. Also take advantage of whatever, mental health is really important. We're on our computers a lot. It's been a really, really, crazy time. Take advantage or utilize student support services. So whether or not that's mental health services, counseling services on your campus, those types of things, definitely reach out to the student support services that are available to you on your college campuses. And that might be another thing for you to think about as you're going through this college admissions process and further researching these schools that you're interested in attending, right? What type of services do they provide to students in terms of supporting them during these transitions as well too? So with that, this is pretty much it. We're gonna open it up for questions. So we do have 2 questions. So the first question is, how do you know if you should submit your test scores to a test optional school? If your score is in the middle 50 or below, should you send, and can that count against you? I'll have, I guess, Stephanie maybe answer this since she went over the test portion of the college admissions process.
Sure. Yes. Great question. Tough question to answer with just limited information. So I would say really, unfortunately, I can't give you an answer over a screen. If we were sitting together and I were your college counselor and I knew all of the details of the rest of your application, then maybe I could share some additional details. So I would say reach out to your college counselor or school counselor and get a sense of whether or not they think this is the right step for you in submitting standardized test scores to that institution. There's going to be a lot of factors that your college counselor will keep in mind, including your grades and rigor up until this point and through your senior year, as well as the admission selectivity of the different schools that you're applying to, and things like that 50% mark and kind of where your test scores are falling. So too difficult to say yes, submit or don't submit with a quick answer, but instead I'll say do a little bit of digging on the school's website and also connect with your college counselor or the appropriate resource within your school community.
And then we have a second question just asking, what does super score mean?
Yeah, so super score is a term that we use to talk about standardized testing when the institution is looking at your highest score within individual sections and putting it together for a combined super score or your best combined score. So on the SAT, if I took the SAT, let's just say I took it twice, and the first time I did really well on the evidence-based reading and writing section, but then the second time I did better on the math section than the first time. The admission office, if they're super scoring, they'll take my evidence-based reading and writing from the first SAT, my math score from the second SAT, and they'll combine those together to make my super score SAT. Some institutions also super score for the ACT and take your highest in each of the individual subsections to create a highest composite. So that's going to vary across school to school, institution to institution for whether or not they do super score. And the SAT, the College Board does offer you the opportunity to sort of send in all of your scores or to send in your best scores. So that gives you a couple of options as well as to how you navigate that process.
So the next few questions we have are essay related. So the first question is, can you use an essay that you wrote in high school for a project instead of writing a new one for your application? So Camille, do you have any insight?
Sure. So obviously it depends on what application you are filling out, if it's an institution-specific application and what their requirements are for the essays. Or for example, if you're writing for the Common App. Now on the Common App, the 7th essay prompt is an open essay question. And it specifically says, write something, an essay of your choice, or use an essay that you've already submitted for schoolwork. The tricky part about that is that that personal essay is supposed to help us get to know you a little bit better. So you have to choose, if you want to use an essay that you've already written, it needs to be something that is very personal, that will help us get to know you. So if it's just a beautifully written essay about a vacation you went on or about a person you know, that's not going to hit the mark because we won't be learning anything new about you. So I don't encourage students to use the 7th prompt because it is so tricky. We really are trying to learn more about you as a person. And so it really depends on what that essay was about. You could use the basis of that essay or portions of that essay in that open-ended question and maybe turn it into more of a personal essay, but it's tough to do that. So just be careful with that. And again, like Stephanie said, maybe talk to your counselor about that.
The next question asks about essay sections if they can be super scored.
Camille,
So I guess my assumption is perhaps if maybe multiple essays are submitted, how are they weighed against each other is my interpretation of that question.
Or maybe maybe you're asking about the essay sections, portions of the SAT or the ACT.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll let you answer that one, Stephanie, then, since I think it's a test score question.
You've stumped us on your question. So on the standardized testing component, I will say, if that's what you're referring to, the essay section of standardized testing, there are many institutions that actually do not require the essay section for standardized tests for either the SAT or the ACT. So they would likely ignore or disregard the essay section of the standardized test score. For institutions that do require it, then my next question would be, if you require the essay section, to use super score across standardized test scores. So it's a good question to ask institutions specifically, but I think you'll find by and large that many institutions do not require anything beyond sort of the standard ACT or the standard SAT at this point. Years ago, many institutions did require writing sections or essay sections of standardized tests, but most institutions have sort of moved away from that.
And then the last question we have so far, if there are any other questions, please continue to put them in the Q&A box, is Camille, could you expand on what institutions are looking for in essays?
Yeah, so again, it's going to depend on the application that you're completing. And for example, the Common App has a personal essay. And as I mentioned, that essay is really all about us getting to know you better, sort of filling out your application and giving us your personal side of things. Other institutions might have very specific questions. They'll want to know why you're choosing a specific major and what you've perhaps done in the past to show the interest that you have in that particular major. So there might be some very sort of cut and dry questions from different institutions. Another type of essay, because there are lots of types of essay, but the supplemental essays that often colleges ask. For example, on the Common App, everybody's required to complete the personal essay. Some institutions will require a supplemental essay. And sometimes they're optional, sometimes not. But typically what universities are trying to gauge in those supplemental essays is sort of your interest in that school. So for example, Syracuse, we ask a question about, basically why you want to study with us. And we're looking to see how much a student is really interested in our university. Have they done their research? Is there a professor they're interested in studying with? Is there a particular major that they really want to pursue? And maybe we've got a particularly good level of that major. Different things, is there a study abroad program that you particularly want to attend? So we're looking for students that have actually done some research and not just like checked us off as number 10 on their Common App list, for example. So a lot of times schools are looking in those supplemental essays for your interest, your demonstrated interest. And not just, giving us cut and paste something from our website that we already know, but information about really your interest in the school. So there are different sorts of essays depending on the type of application you're reading. And again, your best source of information is always going to be either the admissions representative from the college or your college counselor in your high school.
Another question just came in that asked about institutions' support of students with learning disabilities, and if there's a way to tell about looking online at the school or if one school supports more than another. I think I can address this question. I would say look on the school website. So at UH Manoa, we have an office called Kokua. So Kokua Support Services is there specifically to assist students who have all types of, learning disabilities. And so I believe every university has something like that on their college campus to help students who need additional support while they're there. So I would say definitely look online. As mentioned, definitely talk to your college counselor, talk to your admissions rep as well too, just to kind of get a better idea specific to the school that you're looking into as to what type of support services they do provide for students who might need a little bit more extra support while at college as well. But I would say it's pretty standard for there to be some type of support service. But if you want more specifics, definitely talk to your admissions rep and or your college counselor as well too for more details. And we've got about 5 more minutes. If there are any, so there's another question. It was about how study abroad programs have been impacted by COVID. So I can address it from UH Manoa, and Camille, since she was a study abroad, I'm sure she can talk about like perhaps Syracuse, but all I can say I know, and then Stephanie maybe for Williams as well, but at Manoa, unfortunately, it was canceled all last year. We didn't have any students really go out during 2020, but we just started our first group of students. We're having some go out this summer. So they're slowly having the study abroad programs come back up. And so I would say that at least universities, at least UH Manoa side, waiting a little bit more on the side of caution about sending students out, but we're definitely starting to send more students out on study abroad opportunities.
Yeah, I would say the same thing for Syracuse. Obviously, last March, all of our centers were shut down and all of our students were brought home. We did not offer summer programs or fall semester programs. However, this spring, we did start up very limited programming in some of our centers. So hopefully that will continue into the summer. And then by the fall, we are accepting applications for our freshman program overseas. So we have every intention of being back on track by the fall for study abroad.
I think you both summed it up perfectly, so I don't have anything to add there.
So we have a question about financial aid, and what do you recommend for those in the gap financial aid situation? So for example, they don't have a very low EFC, but the high cost of living in Hawaii, right? There's a disparity there. So any recommendations you might have for students in that situation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is where building a diversified college list will be important as you and your family kind of navigate what the search process is going to look like. So I would say to students, have a mix of schools on your list, have some in which you might be competitive for a merit-based scholarship, have some that might meet 100% of demonstrated need, and so they will factor in perhaps some of those cost of living components that you were just referring to. And then also have some schools that might offer great in-state options, right? So I think having a nice mix as you're going into your application process can be helpful, so that as you're getting all of your admissions decisions back, you can really weigh the best financial option for you and your family. The other thing I will say is it is always okay to appeal your financial aid decision, and it is always okay to ask for more money. Doesn't mean that the institution is going to have it, but you can always ask. So if you get to that point in senior year and you're really not sure and you have a top choice, sorry, I've got a fire truck or something going by my window, and you have a top choice institution that you really want to attend, but it's not financially viable for you and your families, appeal and see what you can make happen for that financial aid package.
We have another question about, and this might be a little bit hard to answer, just about applying to specific departments for admission.
Oh, that's going to depend on the university, and I think that's a whole presentation in and of itself. And it looks like we are at the end of our program. So that'll be. Did we just get ended? Okay, that will
I think we have
be,
1 minute left.
okay, so that will be in the chat and we'll be able to answer that question perhaps a little bit more in depth by email.
And one last question, if we can throw it in, is what do you recommend for students to earn financial assistance if they don't qualify for financial aid?
My suggestion there is to look at merit-based scholarship opportunities that might be viable for you and your family. And the other thing I will say is you never know if you're going to qualify for financial aid if you don't apply. So whatever you do as you go through this process, even if you feel like there is no way we would qualify for financial assistance, apply on the front end because you can't be considered later on down the line if you're not applying initially. And if there were a change in your family circumstances or something unforeseen, you would really want to make sure that that information is in upfront. So always apply because you never know. And then also be sure to look at merit opportunities as well, if that's the case. Sorry that we're at time. So I'm trying to rush this question, but I thank you all so much for joining us. And I think Matt's jumping on screen to tell us that we're done.
Yeah, thank you all so much for that presentation and all the information you shared. And thank you to our attendees for joining us for this session. After you close this window, a very quick 4-question survey will appear, and we really do appreciate your feedback. Please do sign up for additional sessions happening later today. And again, a recording of this session will be available in about a week at strivescan.com/Hawaii. And so that does conclude our session. Thank you all so much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.